And then we are live. Perfect. Hello, Richard, and thank you so much for joining us in Collab 365.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I will just hand over to you, and you'll have a session about user adaptation in Office 365 today.
I do. We're going to talk about a lot of specific adoption activities. So if you had a chance to attend the keynote where we talked about the ways in which to drive adoption, we're going to talk about how people, specifically with examples, people are driving adoption. There'll be a little bit of overlap because of the two sessions deal with a similar topic. So if you haven't seen the keynote, that's okay. You'll get some new insights in this. And if you have, I promise there will be some things that I didn't have time to get into depth in the keynote. With that, why don't I switch it over to the PowerPoint presentation? So let me just...
Good luck.
Thank you very much. So let me just switch this, and voila, you guys should now see a match striking to signify that we are igniting adoption. It's a pretty slow match, and today, again, we're really going to focus on adoption activities. So if you're in the meeting room and you're in the chat window and you have access to it, one thing that you could do is you could add in your own adoption activities and methods that you've seen work, because I know everyone would really appreciate, and learning from one another can be really beneficial. So don't let it just be me speaking in terms of the entirety of the session. With that, I'm going to flow right into it. My name is Richard Harbridge. I've had the pleasure of working with many organizations over the years around governance, and part of governance back in the day used to be user guidance and helping people kind of better use the platform. And naturally, over time, adoption started to take a bigger center stage. And I would say that now, especially when we look at things like Office 365, where you're paying per user and you really want to maximize the benefit Office 365 is providing, adoption is really, really important and critical, both from a Microsoft perspective, because they want you to use the service and maximize that usage, and of course from an enterprise perspective, because we want to make sure we're getting the bang for our buck per person. So the big note there is, if you have any questions or if you have anything beyond today, feel free to reach out to me. There's a lot of interesting stories I have that I can't fit into, unfortunately, just this hour. One of the key things is, a lot of times people say, well, adoption doesn't really matter to me or to our organization, or there's an assumption that if we just deliver it, if we implement Office 365 effectively, people will come to the platform. People will kind of make their way onto it and start utilizing it. And the truth is that's not accurate, right? So the build that they will come is inaccurate. Now, to be clear, a really effective deployment and successful deployment is critical. It's foundational to having good adoption, but it's not enough on its own. So what we want to do is we want to dig into why this is important. So one of the biggest things that I would highlight to a stakeholder in your organization that may not perceive adoption as being really important is that it actually improves the capability of the platform. So if all of us actually use Office 365 and we all are effectively using it, then our behaviors are being tracked and Microsoft is able to better improve the product. So for Microsoft, it benefits, and for all of us who purchase the product, it benefits us. The more usage, the more types of usage, the more diversity of usage, the better typically the features and the telemetry and other things are. Another piece to this is the actual capabilities within the platform are enriched by usage. So Delve is really helpful when more and more people use it, more and people view things, like things, comment on things, or share openly. All those things result in a better Delve experience. If you take something like Office Video, which is again one of those new experiences, the more people contribute videos and share and like and comment, again, the more valuable those videos and the curation of those videos will be. Yammer is similar, Skype for Business with Presence and other things is similar. The gist of it is, the more people use these technologies, the better outcomes we get as a business, and certainly as individuals, it benefits us when others use it. So this shared or collective benefit is really important. And if we don't achieve at least certain thresholds of usage, to be frank, some of the functionality in Office 365 just isn't going to have a big impact in our organization. One other note here is that a lot of times organizations say, well, we've been implementing Exchange for years and everyone has to use Exchange, so everyone knows exactly how to use Exchange and there's no need to train them and so on and so forth. And there's no need to take proactive action around adoption. And what I would argue here is, most companies are accurate. This is real data from one of the companies that we worked with. You can see that Outlook is being used very heavily, but the reality is that Outlook, when we dug deeper, it's that they're using basic capabilities in Outlook. They're sending mail, they're receiving mail, they're doing things like that. It doesn't mean that they're doing more advanced capabilities in Outlook, like rights management, data loss prevention, and using those capabilities either from an organizational level and implementing those, or even at an end user level, doing things as simple as when you schedule a meeting, using the suggestive scheduling times, and when you create a Skype for Business meeting, clicking the new meeting option and then clicking Skype for Business up in the top corner of it so that it creates a Skype for Business meeting. Or there's many of these simple things that improve productivity and make it a little bit more efficient for the user, but that they might not have explored those capabilities because they weren't in either previous versions, or they were just never exposed to those capabilities and how they would work. So there is an opportunity, even with really mature workloads like Outlook or Skype for Business, where you can actually teach people other ways they can use the tool. Skype for Business, one of my favorite features to show people is that they can tag a person so that they can see when they're coming online, and this can be really helpful, obviously, for your boss to know, when they're coming online, so you can, say hi or do something like that. But it's also really important because sometimes you need to get a hold of someone and you're just not sure the best way to get it through urgently. So what I'll do is I'll tag someone, I'll text them, I'll call them, I'll do everything right to make sure I get hold of them. And sometimes the tagging wins because as soon as they pop online, I can send them an instant message and we can jump on a Skype for Business meeting and continue our discussion. So the key here is, again, getting people to use the platform is really important. We talked about that, but also getting people to kind of mature and improve their usage is just as important. There's also a whole behavioral analysis piece, and a lot of organizations, they say, well, again, I know adoption matters, but it doesn't matter as much for us. And so they say, I'm not going to deal with it right now because what happens is when we introduce these new technologies, naturally, people are going to have to deal with the change, right? So what happens is when you introduce change, any change really in the enterprise, people have a negative consequence, right? So what happens is if I introduce a productivity change by introducing something like Office 365, you're going to see productivity decrease initially until people understand the new ways in which they can work, right? Same thing with SharePoint, OneDrive, etc., versus perhaps like a file share or something more simplistic. So when you introduce those, your goal is to reduce the negative consequences. One, so they don't say this sucks and I'm going back to the old method, especially if they have that option available to them. And two, we want to accelerate the change because we want to get to the benefit quicker, right? Both for their own personal adoption benefit as well as for our organizational impact. And so the way you do that is you manage the change. You have to take proactive effort, planning effort, and you actually have to engage with users in this cycle. So training is one of the typical ways people reduce this lower curve of negative consequences, because training is a safe place. You can have negative consequences, right? You're making mistakes and learning, and it's okay, and you'll quickly get into that accelerated change. And by the time training's done or close to when it's finished, a short time after, you'll already start getting all these wonderful positive impacts from having used this new capability. So training's important, but even without training, there's other reasons it's really critical to provide some sort of managed change. And this slide, this picture specifically used to be something else besides OPOOP. You can imagine what. And the idea here is if you ignore the change, you're at an even greater disadvantage because you're at a competitive disadvantage to other organizations, right? Other organizations are having those productivity gains. They're maximizing the money that they're spending on things like Office 365, and they're getting the best return, and that's going to give them an advantage, right? Whether it's a very small one, or in some cases it can be quite significant, especially when you get into responsive organizations that use things like Yammer and are better connected. For the experience on the customer side, most customers are expecting that, right? That you should be, as functional as the consumer world is in terms of connectivity and collaborating and being productive. So really important, don't have organizations hesitate because there's a negative change to deploy, and then once they're deploying or when you're planning on the deployment, make sure you do some pre-work, work during the launch, and then post-work, and we'll talk about that ongoing to improve adoption. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this into 4 pretty manageable chunks. The first one I'm going to zip through really fast because I'm hoping you guys have already seen it. If you haven't seen it, it'll be really obvious that you're going to go look up this resource after. So that's the Microsoft approach. The other three are all activities that I've seen organizations do that have had some level of success. So I'll explain each one, and there's more that are in some books and other resources that I'll highlight. So the first one, the green one there, is about awareness. So it's getting people into Office 365 in the first place. The second one is about understanding. It's helping people value Office 365. And the last one is about kind of building solutions, which kind of puts everything together. So let's talk about achieving better adoption. One of the key things with adoption is a lot of times people say, I don't know where to start, it's too much. You know, the organization might say, okay, I get it, adoption's important, but is there anything we can really do about it? And the answer is yes, and it's not that hard to get started. So what I would do is I would cheat to get started, and I would use what Microsoft has already built as a good starting point. So Microsoft has taken the time to, based on a whole lot of research, based on a whole lot of interactions with different businesses, they've determined these are the 4 ways, sort of 4 steps to the process of successful adoption, right? You need to have a good vision and identity for business scenarios and how they apply to effectively achieving business objectives. I've talked about that in the keynote. And then you have to get into prioritizing solutions and creating an adoption plan. So the adoption plan is basically how you're going to get to those success criteria. And then, of course, you need to commit resources, budget, all those other things, invest in it, and then start executing that adoption plan. And then, of course, the adoption plan needs to be iterated on a constant basis to continually improve adoption and make adoption more meaningful. And this makes total sense because Office 365 has new capabilities always coming out, so you have to do this iterative process because you may have perfect adoption initially because you did everything right and everyone's really on board, but as new capabilities come in, if you're not continuing to invest in that adoption, then you're going to have a fall off at some point, or you're going to have inefficiencies where people could be more productive if they just had a little bit more engagement. So this makes sense, right? You have activities that they suggest. These are sort of broad activities like creating training plans, having communication plans, doing teaser videos if you can, doing usage policies. There's a lot of things that are kind of I'm not saying they're expected, but if you're not doing these basic things, then you're really in trouble because these are sort of fundamental, right, to deploying any technology successfully, but especially a SaaS technology like Office 365 that impacts everyone. So, so start with their plans. If you look inside of the success.office.com, I'll come back to that again, success.office.com, where Microsoft has all this guidance, they actually have quite a few tips. And I'm going to skip through these slides. It's okay. The slide deck's available on SlideShare. I've also posted it in the window, and I'll make sure at the end of this you'll have a link to this. It's success.office.com, so you can get access to it. But there's wonderful tips. There's wonderful posters and flyer. These are templates that you can use. You can change it just by inserting your logo, or you can take the whole thing and rebuild it based on what they've provided. You can do countdown announcements and emails, other things to spread awareness. You can do highlights of teaser videos. I'm a huge fan of trailers if you're doing something, rolling out a new intranet as part of this Office 365 launch. You know, you can buy merchandise. Actually, you can buy merchandise from Microsoft that allows you to advertise the upcoming launch or help people understand, you know, they have access to this really amazing technology. You can do tips and tricks emails. A lot of these things, by the way, you want to do in campaigns. So if you're doing tips and tricks, make sure you're doing those with sort of an end goal. Maybe weekly you have a contest or something like that and some really good prizes so that when people learn all these tips and tricks, they're putting them into practice, because tips and tricks without execution, without them using it, is kind of pointless. So there's different tricks to do that, but make sure if you're doing tips and tricks emails that you are getting people to actually use them. Otherwise, they'll forget about them pretty quickly. Scenarios are really, really helpful. I'll talk about scenarios a little bit more when I talk about understanding when to use what, which I know a couple of you have probably seen already at the conference. And then there's also some quick start guides. There's even this sort of transition. So, hey, I'm going from Office 2010 to 2013, or I'm going now, Office 2013 to 2016. They're going to have a whole lot of guides and things like that that you can utilize, and you can print out, you can hand to people, you can send them electronically, you can make it so people can download them themselves. They have a great learning collection, so you can help users find the training that makes sense for them, because Microsoft spent a lot of time and energy building awesome training and guides and things like that. So don't build training yourself. You don't really need to. I'm not saying training's not relevant or formal training's not relevant. I'm saying that if it's just self-service scenarios, you can provide that to your users without you having to invest in rebuilding all that, as assuming, again, it matches the way in which you're using Office 365. So if you're using it out of the box, perfect. Office 365 Learning Center, again, a good culmination of resources and collection of resources. They have survey templates. The survey templates are good. You definitely want to build your own survey templates. Keep in mind, surveys should be targeted. I'm very particular about this. I don't think organizations that do very broad-based surveys have a lot of success. I'm not saying it can't be successful. I'm saying most of the time it's better to have broken that survey into like 3 surveys targeted for specific groups or classifications of people, so you can get more detail from those who you think will either be able to provide it or where you need that additional detail. It's also good because you can identify champions and then potentially accelerate the growth of champions by doing different types of engagement models like surveys. Success criteria is also really important. You have to figure out what are your metrics, how are you measuring your success. Again, all of this is provided by Microsoft, including some help desk resources and more at success.office.com. That's on the left-hand side of your screen there where it says success.office.com. Go take a look. If this wasn't inspiring you to go take a look, I don't know what will. It's a really good resource. If you've looked at it recently, maybe a year ago, take a look again, because they have some new resources and they're constantly updating this, especially as we get closer to some of these new experiences being available. This is something that Microsoft will continue to invest in. So again, resources, great starting point. Now you hopefully have an adoption plan. Now you hopefully have some of the basic activities, the things that every organization pretty much should consistently do, because this is a very horizontal play, right? It should apply to almost every vertical and industry. And no matter how you use Office 365, pretty much everything in this site typically is applicable to your business. So that's achieving better adoption. Step 1, go read that and start utilizing the Customer Success Center, specifically success.office.com. Now let's talk about these other 3 categories of activities, and I'm going to give you some examples that either aren't on that site or that I might have more details to give. If you look for things like Office 365 adoption tips, you get all sorts of results, but to be honest, they're not really what I was looking for. I kept looking for an activity, a thing I can do, I can just replicate and see, is it working, is it not, a thing that I can take and put into a campaign and then measure to see if we're having the impact that we want to have. So that's really what I wanted to build. To start that off, I wrote a bunch of content in a book called Improve It, .how/book. That's where you can get it from. And this isn't just me. This is a number of other wonderful authors in the SharePoint space. But my chapter is about Office 365, not just SharePoint. And we go through a lot of the things that are in the work that we did with success.office.com, and then, of course, the work that we're continuing to do to try and help customers build better adoption campaigns and maximize usage. So, so there's great activities. The ones that I'm going to call out today are in this. So they're explained in the whatever it is, 9,000 words or whatever, or X number of pages that I created for this book. So it's available for free. You can even copy and paste it. If you really want just the word content, you can also reach out to me. And if you want help implementing a lot of these things, we do that as a service. So get ready for information overload, because I'm going to go through these as fast as humanly possible. So 1, we want to get people into Office 365. Spread awareness and get people in Office 365. Well, if we're going to do that, then let's come up with different ways to bring people into the Office 365 experience, right? How do we do that? Well, sometimes you just need something that's a frequent use. And I know this is overused and it's overplayed, but it still is a really relevant topic, right? A lot of organizations on an intranet or something like that, they'll have a lunch menu from the cafeteria, or they'll have a takeout menu or a collection of takeout menus that you can use, right? Especially if your business has got a lot of remote offices and stuff like that. And then that'll enable people to order food or get together and do all sorts of other things. So this is a common pattern, and the reason it's common is because it encourages people to come to the portal, or in this case to go to Office 365 and SharePoint Online and explore a little bit and get a little bit more familiar with some of the features. This isn't really going to educate people, it's just that it's a frequent activity. I know other people have mentioned things like, hey, what about making sure that the business process for taking time off or something like that, that's in SharePoint. Well, that can drive SharePoint usage as well, but remember that that's less frequent, right? You typically only do that a couple times a year, and so what you're looking for is those high frequency activities, especially when we want to drive awareness, and then we can just invest a little bit in those in spreading awareness that, hey, you can do this, you can do this, because then often people will explore other things within that environment, and you can even create models where you bring people to other places from there. You know, some other common patterns in intranets that you see is people on the move, promotions, new hires, birth announcements. There's a lot of things like this, right, where you have some sort of publishing of information that's relevant to people, and people kind of want to go frequently to see what's happening in the business. Of course, one of the other things that you should do is integrate it with other processes in your business. So one of the things that most businesses have is they have sort of an anniversary or milestone program. And so if you have a milestone program, why not integrate Office 365, Yammer, whatever it is, into that program. So maybe you give people a unique badge to their picture profile so that they can, you know, show a 10 or whatever the number is in their picture profile, and you can do that universally across your organization. Or what you do is to show off this, you create like a nice little anniversary and milestone site and a place that people can congratulate them through social streams like Yammer and other things like that. So there's lots of patterns like this, whether it's Portal or whether it's Yammer or whether it's, you know, something interesting like adding some sort of connection to profile pictures or something. There's lots of ways in which people could potentially do this. Another big one is event picture sharing. These are, again, the ones that I'm going through right now are pretty straightforward, right? If you have events, you put the pictures up into your Office 365 tenant. There's a number of ways to do this. You could even take videos and put those videos up into the Office video portal. And by doing this, people, again, there's a frequency here. Most people after these events, they want to go grab their picture. They want to go look through other people's pictures, and you're just at least engaging and bringing people into that environment, and then perhaps they'll start to look at other things like, hey, wait a second, maybe we could use this for not just these types of pictures, but we could put diagrams and other data points and stuff like that in here. And then, of course, in Office Video, maybe they'll even be inspired to upload their own training videos, because as they explore, they start to see other people providing that. Here's an example of a pretty crazy idea. So fake profiles is something that's really interesting. I'll come back to a more official or a use pattern that you might actually be more interested in. But one organization we worked with, this is back when Charlie Sheen was a little bit crazier, and they created a fake profile for Charlie Sheen. They're a little bit avant-garde, and they basically, in this fake profile, had him commenting on things, going to people's pages and newsfeeds and stuff, and basically participating throughout the organization, uploading documents. It was pretty funny. So people got the idea of profiles and modified and who did this and who did that via this, and they did it as a very targeted, proactive campaign to basically encourage people to learn a little bit more. And then what they did to help out is they pointed on the Charlie Sheen profile to real good examples of how to use these technologies versus how he was using it. So you kind of knew if he was doing something, you shouldn't be following suit, and you should not replicate that. And it was their way of kind of making it a little bit easier to maybe stomach some of the policies and stuff that they were putting in place. Again, not for everyone, but a really funny way of doing it. I've seen Santa Claus profiles and things like that as well. Another one, and this one I do like a little bit more, is where you take a profile and you create an official one. So this is like Office of, so Office of to-do lead, or HR, official HR. And so what you do is by creating this profile as a profile, it's a true profile, it has licensing associated with it. You can do the cheapest licensing, right, Business Essentials. But you create this profile that way that user can be logged in by other users, so you can basically log in as that user, and then you can answer questions in Yammer, and that will be an official answer because it's coming from the official profile. You can also have things like uploading documents from this account so that it's clear that this is actually an official document and that it has a little bit more weight to it. Remember, too, that there's a lot of discovery in SharePoint and Yammer and in Delve where you look up a person and you see all the things that person has been working on, etc. So one of the difficulties that some organizations have had where they've been doing this for a long time is that as a person moves from one department to another, they might have been really big in this one department, really driving engineering, who knows what, right? They've been really helping build out a lot of wonderful content and IP there, but when they transition to a different group like sales, now they're all talking about sales scenarios and sales guidance and everything else, and that may not apply to a lot of the engineering people. So while everyone followed that person because they're wonderful and they're still a great person to be connected to, the content is now a little confusing, right? And over time, it's not clear who is the best place or where is the best content. And so even having an official user just to go in and like things and comment on things so that you can understand which things are higher quality can be an interesting way to kind of game the ranking system and really curate it in a new way. So this may seem a little complicated, but it's actually not that hard to do, and it can have some really interesting impact. It's not something you should overuse, let me be clear, because then you're managing all these fake profiles and you're dealing with a whole separate mess, but it can be a really effective way of potentially increasing adoption. And it's really interesting to see how organizations have used this. Another comment, no, I'll bring it back. There's another, I have another slide for it. Sometimes you send emails, right? So this was my old email at Microsoft, and when I would send my emails, I apologize to whoever has that phone number now. I know they get calls all the time. I'm so sorry. Please don't call that phone number. If you incorporate your signature in email, you can do a couple things, right? You can say, here's my Yammer profile, maybe my latest post there. You can point to your Delve profile. You can even take things like put the new article engine in Delve and have those types of things and say like latest article and put that in there. And so people might be interested enough that they click on it and then they go read about that article. So using your signature just like you would in an external perspective can be really powerful as internal. Remember, it's really easy with your signature to say this is for internal and this is for external, right? There's two different signature lines at times, and so that can be also helpful. You just do insert and you switch it up each time, right? Or you use different draft templates and so on and so forth. So there are ways of doing this, and it can make a big difference, and it's something anyone can do. A lot of the other examples, like the official, you might need to be a leader in the organization or have some sort of authority. Here, you can kind of just do it yourself. Internal advertisements I mentioned before, so you can go buy these and then deploy them throughout your organization. It's also interesting, sometimes you can get this support from Microsoft or partners that might have the resources that you can use. So if you can, do these types of things, right? Because they do make a little bit of a difference. It makes it a little bit more familiar when they finally do transition. Sometimes it creates interest, and then based on that interest, if you're doing other campaigns, you can really get people to feel like this is really significant and important. My point with scavenger hunts, trivia contests, and competitions is this. They're really great, and I've seen some really creative ones. I've seen SharePoint Olympics. I've seen recently with Office 365 organizations create these weekly contests, which has been really exciting because it's a more of a campaign almost, where they just every week they have a new contest, new prizes, and they've been doing that now for months. They originally started with a 31-day of Office 365 campaign, and then over time they just started, once they did 31 days and they saw the impact, they said, you know what, let's just do this every week, and we'll monitor and measure it every week and see the success, and then that way we'll always be coming up with more stuff, and it feels really engaging. It's actually pretty amazing because they've kept it up. It really does feel like everyone is really contributing. People are really excited. It increases your likelihood of winning because you have more and more chances. So it's been interesting to see that ongoing. But if you're just doing these as like a one-off, be really careful, because while you may see increased usage initially, right, because you're doing a scavenger hunt or a campaign or whatever, people go in, but do they come in after that, right? These are all about awareness, so you have to follow it up with some other exercises, right, and activities. So if you're not doing it on an ongoing basis, you're going to see significant adoption perhaps initially in terms of usage count, but then you'll see it slowly dissipate, and so you have to figure out other ways to sustain it. Don't do this on its own, right? It doesn't have the value unless you combine it with other things. Here's an example of one organization. They basically created a charity campaign. What they wanted to do was get people to fill out their user profiles, something we all need to do, right? And this is really helpful for Dell, for people search, for a lot of reasons. It's helpful to have people fill out their profiles, even for workflow. So what they did is they said, hey, during this month or these 2 months, if you fill out your profile, we will donate X dollars. So let's just say, for example's sake, it's $5. We'll donate $5 to a charity. And so what they then do is they say, okay, and the department that fills out the most profiles within this time period, they're going to choose which charity gets the money. So everyone knows eventually they need to fill out the profile, but it's a low priority. Now you have social pressure and you have departmental pressure sometimes saying, hey, you should do this, and if you don't do it during this time frame, you feel pretty guilty because you could have donated and contributed to a charity just by doing something you need to do anyways. And so creating social pressures like this is really powerful. It doesn't even need to have money. You don't actually have to donate things. Sometimes there's other interesting ways you can create this type of social pressure. Or you can even have like a manager, an executive, or a leader who basically says, I'm not going to read this or do this unless you put it here. So like one of my favorite examples of this was one leader who said, you know what? Why don't you, if you want to ask me a question, stop emailing me and stop IMing me, put it in Yammer, otherwise I won't answer it. And if it was really personal, then he would allow it, but otherwise he would literally respond back, post this in Yammer, and then I'll take a look at it. So he was really gung-ho about Yammer. So, that's a type of pressure that's a little bit different. It's from that individual. But if you start to create these cultural norms, then it can become very natural, right? It's like let me Google that for you, right? It's instead of that, it's like, let me help you do the right thing, which is post this in a different place. Identities can really help too because it enables people to connect a little bit more, and enables people to talk about things without talking necessarily about the underlying technology. So doing vanity URLs or doing vanity URLs with Office 365, by the way, is a little bit difficult. All you can do is forwarding. But if you take the idea more of identifying with branding, not so much vanity URLs, but identifying with branding, some of these SharePoint sites or things like that, it can really help. Or being consistent, right? So if you're going to create an Office 365 group, and you have a Yammer group, and you have a SharePoint group, then ask yourself, do you have one identity or do you have multiple identities, right? And so how do you clarify that identity? It's like a design or branding exercise, right? And it is important, especially when you're leading the organization. So if you're building some of these things as examples or exemplary work, make sure that you're following sort of best practices from a branding perspective, because you want to make sure, even if you don't do literally SharePoint branding or design work, if you're just naming things, you try and do a good job at naming things based on how you want people to use them. Surveys, polls, and feedback. This is a little bit of a repeat. In the keynote, I mentioned that this is really important, not to just do surveys or not just to do polls, but to take action on the results of that as soon as possible, and to communicate how the surveys or the results of the surveys or polls has changed something you're going to do, right? It's improved or tweaked this or guided this or confirmed that we should be doing this, etc. Really important, otherwise it's a mood exercise. And of course, I've already mentioned that targeting is much better than sort of blanket approaches. And targeting can be tricky, so sometimes even using these methods to find your targets and then do follow-ups can be more effective than trying to give people more complex surveys or polls. Baited email hooks is a pretty simple method that's used in the Internet of Things, phishing scams. I'm sure you've heard of that, where people put in, hey, you can go access this, or hey, I've got a package for you, or whatever, or I've just got a bunch of money and I need your help, etc. I'm not saying you should put those words, but there's lots of times where you communicate something internally, and what you can do is, instead of putting it all in the email message, which you know is not the right thing to do, put bits of it and then put the rest of it saying, if you want to know more, go to this Word document, which is in SharePoint, in a group, in Yammer, whatever, this official note perhaps in Yammer, right? Whatever it is, you position people so that they go from your email where everyone is corresponding and everyone's probably collaborating already, and they start to get exposure to these other tools. And you're also leading by example by using these other tools so that other people can comment, contribute, and it's not locked in that very simplistic email format where it's kind of one-to-one or one-to-many communication, right? You can actually have people on an ongoing basis continuing to contribute to it, adding context, saying, is this still relevant, and so on and so forth, helping you improve. So again, it's kind of like baited email hooks externally, but you're doing it internally. This is another one of those things that you don't need to be a leader in the organization to do this, so it's something you can do regardless of who you are. Reporting usage patterns. So I mentioned this in the keynote, but I'm just going to reiterate it here. I see a lot of organizations doing a pretty good job at least looking at usage. Thank you. Really appreciate your hard work here. Some organizations have even gone the extent to get third-party products. There's amazing third-party products out there that really help with usage, because one of the things that those products do, pretty much all of them is they allow you to email automatically, weekly, whatever time frame, the reports or sets of reports or whatever it is. And that's really important because you're sharing those reports, right? Or you post the reports somewhere so they're visible. That's also really important. So you need to make sure, if you are ever looking at usage for any reason, take a moment and say, wait a second, I wonder if this data would be useful to someone else. And it's not a lot of work typically to take that and communicate it to other people. And so sharing usage patterns is actually more important than just looking at them in the first place, although it is really important to use that for metrics and measurements and to get an idea of where you're at. There's a content pack coming for Office 365, I don't believe it's out yet, that enables you to do a little bit more in terms of usage reporting, telemetry data. If you've looked at SharePoint 2016, there's even some other interesting patterns for telemetry. Think of more like how's the server and everything going. What we're talking about here is less of that, less of the servers and performance, and more of documents and how people are behaving and things like that. And so when you look at that type of data, be sure to look at things like the Compliance Center in Office 365 and all the cool auditing and other features that Office 365 has that can enable a greater understanding and visibility of what's going on. Remove alternatives. So this is an obvious one, but if you have alternatives, then you're already kind of weakening your position on adoption, because if they get into that negative consequences, they have the option to quickly go back to the alternative. Or even if the alternative is not easy, if you haven't completely blocked it, especially when it's not a good choice for your business, cough, cough, unsanctioned file sharing, Dropbox, etc., then you need to make sure that you've taken some sort of action where you're either blocking it or you're making it very clear in your policies that they should be using, you know, the sanction tools and the tools that you've invested in and are effectively implementing things like data loss prevention on, etc. So you guys get the idea here. If you want more details on this, I know I mentioned it in the keynote and gave it a little bit more depth. Those are examples of getting people into Office 365. You need to do more than what I've mentioned, right? These are just some examples. I hope some of them were new and that you haven't tried yet, but take the ones that are in the success.office.com, add a bunch of these types of things, go look at the Improve It book and grab some more, and then do lots and lots of continual awareness and education-based activities. Here, what we're doing is we're trying to help people value Office 365. So helping people kind of go from just being aware of it or interested in it to really maximizing their value. So the number one method here is obviously empowering champions, identifying champions, and helping champions in your organization grow. And champions in this context are not always managers and not always IT, and that's really important. You have to have other types of champions, because most people actually do learn from coworkers that are non-managers and non-IT, because they feel uncomfortable going to their manager asking sometimes for help, and they often feel like maybe IT is too busy, or you really are too busy to be able to service them in this co-working or coaching method. So this is a really important one. So when we talk about helping users maximize the value and understanding, we have to do all sorts of different techniques to improve the identification and maturation of our coaches and champions. Another key point is integrating key processes with the adoption of these tools. So if you take something like new hire orientation, how many of you in your organizations today have not just popular sites, not here's the sites, here's the internet, here's the sites that you need, etc. Right? Here's the how we have Yammer. Here's the link to it. Go and look at the groups. But how many of you take the role and say, for your role, these are the types of groups, or these are the things that you should take a look at, right? So let me give you a guide for your role that's role oriented for your onboarding, and let's include a lot of these technology things and the scenarios and the other things that we know you're probably going to run into in context of your role. So that way we can say things like, hey, next time you're creating a meeting, know that you can actually create meetings with Skype for Business. And when you do that, if you're doing it with internal and external people, do this way for internal, do this way for external, if there is a difference, right, depending on how you're doing these things. Or perhaps if you're taking on a sales role, how do you work not just with Office 365, but with your other tools, your technology landscape like Salesforce or CRM Online or whatever it is, how do you work with those and Office 365? So it's really important to start to tie these things together. And it's great that you have a starting point. I think most organizations do this, where they say, here's the intranet, here's Yammer, here's why we use Yammer. Hopefully you have those types of guidances. What I'm saying is take it one step further if you can, because it really will make a difference. And your new hires will start to become your examples of how people can potentially start off on the right foot and accelerate their usage of some of these tools. Another one is a lot of organizations do skills training or annual skill validation. So by having, I'm not saying you want to force people to learn this stuff, but by saying basically, look guys, it's pretty much an expectation that you know how to work. And you know how to work effectively. And so Office 365 is how we do a large majority of our work between Office and which is what you download and use on your desktop, as well as Office 365. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have this skills validation for certain roles where they're going to basically go into a class and prove that they can do this. They're going to get training, formal training or not, and there's a bit of, the validation is important because it means that they might do a little bit of prep and they might do a little post work. While this can be painful initially, over time you can reduce it and make it much more specific and focused so that it's not a painful process, but actually something that helps teach people new skills because it can be more personalized to them. But you have to start somewhere, and so sometimes doing a mandated approach it can be a great way to at least initiate the transition and help with change management and do a lot of other things that you should be doing. Another big one is Microsoft's always updating Office 365. So as they introduce new capabilities and as they make it more powerful and effective, you should take advantage of that by going into Office 365 and basically delivering on those new capabilities. So in your organization, if you're turning one of those new capabilities on or it's on by default, announce it, tell people about it, spread awareness. And then the education piece comes in where you help them potentially with scenarios or other types of specific guidance on how to best use that new feature or that new technology. An example of this that's going to come out soon that's going to impact everyone who's listening to this is Planner. And Planner is really, really cool. And I'm not overhyping it. To be clear, it's a minimal viable product, just like Delve's experience and groups and things like that. It's early, right? So it's still going to improve over time, but it's not dissimilar from Trello and other task management tools that are a lot more ad hoc. They're a lot easier to work with. They're not as complex as perhaps project management solutions like Project Online and others. Keep in mind that it doesn't replace Project Online or things like that. It's helping facilitate a need, which is something that companies like Trello and others are doing a good job of today, except they're doing it now in a very integrated way with the rest of the Office 365 suite. So that's a new capability that's coming. It's been announced. You can go look it up. And so when that new capability comes in, we need to make sure we're announcing it, we're helping people understand how to use it, how to maximize their benefit from it, those types of things. And trust me, if you haven't played with it, you'll notice really quickly things like it notifies you, it notifies people that a new task has been created, etc., that are part of a group. So there's lots of things that you can make mistakes really quickly, and so if you don't kind of set some guidance and other things up front, it's going to be a little bit messy when that first releases, and people might get frustrated with it or wish that it hadn't been released, right? And so you really want to manage that change, right? That's really what we're doing, is we're managing change. And some changes Microsoft introduces, like the Delve profile, and now you have, with Delve profile, you have articles and other things like that. And so as those are introduced, or the new praise capability, right, which you will not be able to turn off by default, right? So when you think of things like that, when those capabilities come out, we need to make sure that we're ready for them, we have a plan for them, and then we're engaging users and facilitating the change management, especially if we have alternative tools that either create conflict or confusion. Success stories is another great way to improve understanding. What happens is when we take a story from one person's perspective, right, and we say, here's how Office 365 helped them, one, we can get really interesting insights about their role and how Office 365 might impact their role. Go back to orientation and other role-based training and targeting, and that can lead to better results. Another thing about success stories is they can be great anecdotal evidence or qualitative evidence that Office 365 is making an impact on the business and that it's having a really good positive impact. So for those like myself and others who have built a lot of career opportunity based on Office 365, it's important obviously for us to validate that, and this can be a great way of doing that, because when you get into numbers, even with ROI and calculations like that, it really helps to have some of these qualitative stories. Lastly, people learn from other people. So sometimes by capturing a story, you can actually capture the essence of how and why this matters, what's important. And people will look at that and say, hey, this makes sense to me, this is interesting, because it's from somebody else that they trust and that doesn't have an ulterior motive. They're not trying to teach them to adopt it, etc., and so on and so forth. So there's lots of reasons it makes sense to capture these, share them as openly as you can, add pictures, add anything you can to make them a little bit more interactive, and so that those who actually share the success stories share it widely and loudly and are proud of the fact that they shared the success story. I've even seen some organizations where, again, it's kind of like that badging model where they basically said for those who share a success story, you get like a special icon or you get some special thing to your picture or something else to show that you're sort of a champion, which is a different type of person in the organization than, say, the average user, because you're contributing and you're trying to make the organization better from an efficiencies perspective. Yam jams. So if you're rolling out Yammer specifically, there's a whole lot of wonderful resources that the Yammer team has created. If you go to success.yammer.com or success.office.com, both have it, you'll see a lot of interesting Yammer sort of guidance. And in general, there's a lot of specific guidance when you roll out something like a social network to make it more successful. So there's some starter Yammer groups, like an ideas group, a help group, things like that, that you should have by default. And then you should also do Yam jams because those are really effective ways of increasing engagement. So a Yam jam is basically where you have an executive or a leader or someone people want to listen to and hear from doing a talk or communicating in real time, where other people can then post their messages in Yammer, and there's like tweet jams and other things like that. It's not dissimilar from that. YamWin is also a method where a lot of organizations, they might not use YamWin, they might use something else, but they basically use a hashtag to delineate when a success story has been discovered or when a good case or scenario or something else has been discovered. So if someone basically got benefit from Yammer, they would say YamWin, and then that way later they can report on it from a data perspective. They can see if the numbers are increasing, and they can also explore each of those YamWins because it's probably important to the community managers or the leadership for Yammer. One of my favorite methods by far in improving education and awareness, both at the same time, is creating these best of or best in class or verified groups, communities, SharePoint sites, whatever it happens to be. It could even be like articles, whatever. So you create some sort of badging, for lack of a better term. I'm going to say it's best of. And you stamp things with that. It's better if it's yearly or some other time box thing, by the way, because then people have an interest in renewing it. But if you do that, what happens now is, one, it shows that this is an example or an exemplary scenario of how to best leverage this technology. So that's useful because other people will put weighting towards it in terms of whether or not they should participate or read it or consume it. The other really interesting thing when using these best of scenarios is that you can actually tie metrics and measurement to it. So what you can do is you can educate like a site owner or a community manager or what else would you potentially help? People within your organization that take on these leadership roles. So even a group leader, let's say in Office 365 groups, a channel leader in Office 365 video. So in all these scenarios, you have somebody who's in kind of a champion or leadership role. You're saying, okay, they're going to take ownership of this, right? Or at least they're going to take a lead role in this. And so then you can say to them, well, here's your stats, right? Your diversity of participation it could use improvement, but it's okay. Here you have this level of contribution. You contribute a lot, but other people don't, so you're not doing a good job of getting other people to contribute. If you change these numbers, you're a best of, but you have to exceed these thresholds, or hey, or you passed, but just by this much, and so they understand that the next time when they say best of 2015 or best of 2016, they understand that there's different expectations and that they need to continue to care and feed this, whatever it is, community, group, site, etc. So you guys get the idea, right? Really, really powerful, and there's lots of good examples. Ernst & Young does an example of it where they do a verified Yammer group, and they have all the metrics and everything else that they shared. I believe that's at Ignite, if you go look at the slide decks, and I'm pretty sure it was Ernst & Young. Apologies if I had the wrong customer reference in mind. Another big one is Solution Showcase. So the idea here is, as people build solutions on Office 365, whether it's a custom list connecting to another custom list, whether it's someone building some cool stuff in Access Services, whether it's, and these can be business-driven solutions, by the way, not IT necessarily, whether it's someone building a color calendar, whatever it is, people are building these solutions that are helping solve problems. Maybe it's a workflow, maybe it's something else. And when they build those, we want to showcase them. We want to capture them. We want to share them broadly, and we want to do what we can to try and get business people to connect with other business people that are leading these initiatives versus directly to IT. One, it reduces our cost of ownership, but it also really starts to create a culture of community where there's a sense of shared ownership for these solutions, right? Versus IT taking ownership of them, and then IT really struggling to maintain and keep up with the demand and expectations that the business might have for some of these solutions that they're really rapidly building and rapidly modifying. And of course, IT can step in when appropriate and mature a solution and say, guys, this isn't going to scale, or this isn't the right way of doing it, or we have an alternative. We have, you're building CRM inside of SharePoint or inside of Office 365. Stop. We actually have CRM Online, or we have something else coming in 3 months, or we already have it. You just might not have access to it. Let me connect those dots. So there's two reasons it's important, right? IT gets aware of what solutions are being built, so they can identify which ones they really need to get involved and engaged in, right, to course correct them or scale them. And then at the same time, IT also gets to share in the credit of all the wonderful work the business units and other people are driving from the technology that IT is maintaining and implementing. So there's lots of reasons that this is really helpful. I hope you guys get the idea here. Think of it as like a marketplace for what people are doing with Office 365. And of course, you need to provide guidance on what people can do. There's a whole series of content that we've created on this around when to use what. So when should I use Yammer? When should I use SharePoint? When should I use OneDrive? When should I use Office 365 groups? You can see that there's a little bit of competitive overlap in these products for a purpose. There's a reason for everything, trust me. And so what you do is you want to say, well, when should we use these? How do we help users understand when to use which tool? You can cheat. Go download the When to Use What white paper. It's 60+ pages of awesomeness. I'm only saying that because I'm one of the authors. And then you can get a whole lot of great ideas for how you might want to approach this. So here's an example of what's in the white paper. We have some matrices that are visual diagrams of how people would use the tool and how they might want to change their usage of the tool. We also have scenarios in there. The scenarios that are in there have descriptions. They break down in context what a user would want to do and why they would want to use, say, SharePoint or Yammer instead of Outlook, right? Where Outlook is the default right now. Hey, maybe you should consider these other tools because here's why, right? It's better for these reasons. So these are scenario-based things. These are meant as examples. You should build off of them, right? You could, I guess, just implement these, but I don't think it would do enough. I think you probably want to build off of these. And of course, as new capabilities like Planner and stuff come in, you obviously have to reevaluate how you're providing this type of guidance. But it's okay because we will update the white paper, and if we don't, just yell at us, and we'll make sure that we prioritize updating it with those new scenarios as needed. So it's a cheat, I guess, because I'm not going into all those, when you should use this versus that. But there is specific guidance in there, like, hey, use SharePoint for document management when you need metadata or workflows or things like that, because groups don't really support it. Another example is a different one, but it improves understanding of what the tool's purpose is. So I wanted to take a step back, and I wanted to describe, without hopefully giving away the company that was associated with this. One company implemented social years ago, and the top social conversation in that social tool was, who's hotter, Ryan Reynolds or Ryan Gosling? Well, both are Canadian, so we both know they're hot, so that's good. But the key here is the conversation, the top things that were going on were not of business value, right? So what they had to do is they had to relaunch social under a different approach, where they basically said, before you can access this social platform, we're just going to have you fill out this form. And the form is going to say, what's your business purpose? Why are you using the tool? And here, what are you going to do with it, etc. So it's just making people think a little bit before they use the tool. And initially, in the first day or two, they actually approved them manually, the request to go use the tool, and that helped seed content. That helped ensure that they actually supported and engaged those people as they came into the tool and made sure they understood how to use it, how to better use it. They used it as an opportunity to trigger that. But then they just automatically approved people who filled out the form every day after that. And they never told anyone they did this, and 1 or 2 people figured it out, but most people didn't know. So what happened is, before they go use the social tool, they explain, oh, this is the purpose, this is why I'm using it, and then they get access. So it changed the dynamic in an organization where social was definitely not a benefit from a business perspective to a tool that had a lot of value. So those are examples of how to get more value out of Office 365. I'm going to go really quickly through the solutions because I only have about 7 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we end on time so you guys can go check out some other great sessions. So when you're building solutions on Office 365, you're basically taking Office 365 and you're connecting it with processes and workflow and things that people are doing, right? So it matters. They have really either no choice because they have to go use Office 365 to accomplish what they're trying to do, or it's providing a value that's kind of unique that you can only get on Office 365. So while this is simple, having an internal classifieds can have business value. So if you're a large manufacturer, a lot of times one facility will actually have some equipment that they can sell another facility, and so having this equipment exchange can be really, really, really financially effective and valuable, and I've seen this in practice. Another piece to this, though, is of course just connecting people with needs and being able to help people work with one another more and building relationships and potentially even putting in things into the classifieds that the organization's offering, right, where they can maximize engagement levels. So there's a lot of reasons that whether you call it internal classifieds or something else, these methods in which people can basically transact with one another and engage one another at different levels can be really, really helpful. And this isn't that hard to implement. Many organizations have implemented it before. We've built a couple of these, etc. So it's not like there's a big cost associated with these. A lot of the out-of-the-box, if you will, or quick-run intranets in a box, those all have it as well. Another one is picking out pain points in your organization. So every organization has acronyms, right? We all have probably way too many. In Microsoft, it's insane how many acronyms they have. So having a glossary or an acronym finder or something else is really, really helpful because it helps people get those answers, and it also takes those search results away, hopefully, from the core of search, where search can be optimized for finding documents and other things versus people looking up acronyms and trying to see definitions. So you can actually guide people towards a different search experience when they're looking for that type of thing, which hopefully can mean that that search experience is much better, much more effective, and it also creates new opportunities for engagement. As an example, I might look up something like Kanban or some like Sigma, Six Sigma, etc., whatever it is. And when I look up that term, I might go to a site where actually in Wiki, whatever it is inside of SharePoint, where people have put, hey, this person leads this group. And by the way, here's our approach to this. And by the way, here's a whole lot of guidance on how to implement this if you're looking to implement it in your facility or whatever it is, right? Whatever the right engagement models are. But it provides opportunities for engagement. So hopefully that makes sense. This is a great way to introduce people to wikis, by the way, if you've never done that. And then even something as simple as creating a specific search vertical and search experience for something as simple as presentations. So at Microsoft, there are massive numbers of presentations, and so knowing that I could go to a website address, in this case is /presentations, which would forward on to the presentation site collection, and then in that site collection I could do my searches, and I would see one, recommended content. There was all sorts of other nice visual ways, which I couldn't copy and paste because it would show you content, that you could actually see the content. The advanced search was specific to presentations, so think of the types of advanced search terms that would be different. When you did the search, it only sorted on presentations, and the search relevancy was also tuned when you think about it based on the types of presentations that make sense. Best bets can be different. I guess best bets aren't what they were called before, but you get the idea, right? So these types of simple things can have a huge impact. At a minimum, creating a different experience for finding documents is a great place to start. And of course, building solutions on these things, if you do these types of activities like usability testing, diary studies, card sorting, other things, you can improve solutions as well. So sometimes the solution that you're building is actually something that's based on feedback or based on your own discovery for how people would rather work, right? So an interesting solution that most organizations do is an intranet or an extranet. In both those scenarios, you really want to make sure that you're enhancing it periodically based on usability assessments or based on card sorting exercises, or basically where you understand the information architecture that you developed is actually working for people. Because of course things change every couple of years at a minimum, and so you need to recycle and rethink some of these things regularly. Even when you're in Office 365, you may not do another upgrade of a SharePoint environment or something like that, but you're still going to have to do restructuring every couple of years. And so how do you want to tackle that? And you have a new opportunity to be more thorough with it, hopefully, so you can actually improve it far more, since you're not worried so much about the technology underpinning it. Taking experiences like Office Video that's been out for a long time now and making sure that you've rolled that out inside your organization means that you're meeting users' needs, and you're not really building the solution, you're leveraging the solution that Microsoft has built for you. And so you might build around this. There's a number of ways people might extend this, where they take the embed code and put it in the internet and things like that. But in general, this is just a good thing to take into account, right? How are we rolling out these new capabilities as solutions that sit on top of or with Office 365 to drive more value? So that was as quick as I could possibly cover that. We talked about achieving better adoption, getting people into Office 365, helping people value it, and now we've talked about building solutions in Office 365. I hope that helped you guys. There's a bunch of resources. Don't worry. Again, the deck is available on SlideShare. I'll put a link again just to make sure you have it at the end of this deck. So it's really easy to access. I put some other resources like Microsoft's here, and of course we've got success.office.com, Improve It, the book, and When to Use What white paper. And with that, thank you everyone for your time. I'll pass it back over to the moderator.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Actually, we don't have any questions. Seems you were speaking so fast and so clearly that everybody was just really happy with your session. So thank you so much for learning us all the things about adaptation. Just one thing I want to point out is that the Success Center on successoffice.com is moving to fast track Microsoft.com. So it's a good thing for the audience to also know.
Awesome.
Besides this, I think everybody was just really happy to listening to you. You managed to pack in a lot of information in a short hour, so great work.
Yeah, and there's some slides that are hidden, so if you go down on the deck, you can find out which ones I hid last minute on SlideShare, because all the hidden slides are also available for download. And just a quick note, I will join the session room in a second. I have another keynote coming up at 45 after, so I will have to jump on that at some point, but I'm going to go attend the room, so if you have any additional questions, I'll be there to answer them via the little text box.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and good luck with the keynote later. I will watch it for sure.